Welcome to the December episode of Perspective Live, a Colleges and Institutes Canada initiative where we talk about and share different perspectives on what matters to you. Today's episode addresses the statement, Indigenous rights are human rights. I'm Manjula Salvaraja, your host for the season, and I wish to acknowledge that this episode of Perspectives Live is being produced and broadcast from the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Before we get started, CICAN would like to recognize the ongoing contributions of its corporate partners, Avis Budget, BGIS, Field Effect, and TD, who support CICAN's activities, including bringing you this show, Perspectives Live. First, I'd like to ask Denise Amiot to join me for a quick chat. She is CICAN's president and CEO. Hello, Denise.
Hello, how are you, Manjula?
I am well. How are you?
Doing fine and looking forward the holidays.
Oh, me too. Me too. I think we all need a break, and we're all hoping for a really good 2022. I want to talk to you about how important today is. I mean, 6 years ago to the day, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued its final report, which included 94 calls to action for all Canadians. Some of those calls specifically address education and the role of the post-secondary sector in advancing reconciliation. Is that right?
Yes, indeed, Manjula. And post-secondary institutions across the country, they play an active role in advancing the reconciliation process. In fact, they are key players and they work closely with many local Indigenous partners and businesses to remove the barriers to education and promote a culture of respect, equity, and inclusion. In fact, they are the primary point of access to post secondary education for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis learners.
In fact, you have the data on the accessibility to colleges and institutes. I found this data fascinating. So 95% of Canada's population and 86% of Indigenous populations live within 50 kilometers of a college or institute campus. So these post-secondary institutions are really key players. And that does put your organization, CICAN, on the front line, which explains your initiatives to support indigenization efforts at colleges and institutes, and really Indigenous education as a whole.
Absolutely. We have a number of initiatives that we are putting forward in collaboration with our members. Uh, the one that we're very proud of that has had a major impact is certainly our Indigenous Education's Protocol that we launched in 2014. So that protocol is based on 7 principles to guide the work in support of reconciliation. And it closely reflects the recommendations made by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2015. So today, I'm sure that our guest will be able to talk about many other initiatives and practices that will be of interest to our audience.
Thank you, Denise. I mean, I'm certainly looking forward to hearing how they think the post-secondary sector can move the needle. Thank you, and you'll be back later in the podcast. And accompanying you will be Larry Rosia, President and CEO of Saskatchewan Polytechnics. Thank you, Denise.
Okay, see you
I'm now
later.
For sure. I'm now excited to welcome our special guest. Jody Anderson is Director of Business Development at First Nations Finance Authority. Ashley Cummings is an Indigenous Research Assistant, Inuit Advocate, and a Yukon University student. And Bob Watts is Vice President of Indigenous Relations at the Nuclear Waste Management Organization and on the Board of Trustees at Queen's University. Hello.
Good
Hi,
afternoon.
Angela.
So glad to have all of you here. So let me start with this. We talk so much these days about the power of lived experience. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your own Indigenous heritage and connections. The connections that informs the work that you do. Jody, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Manjula, and hello to the other guests on the panel. It's a pleasure for me to share this stage with you, and hello to everybody watching today. Ani Buju, Jody Anderson, Indigenous Cause, Kuchiching Nindo Jabao Adawan Ninda. In my language of Ojibwe, I've said, hello, my name is Jody Anderson. I am a proud member of Kuchiching First Nation, which is located in northwestern Ontario, also in Treaty 3 territory. I grew up in a small town called Sioux Lookout, northwestern Ontario, beautiful town in Ontario's north. But I now call home Ottawa, which is also located on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people. So thank you for having me today. I think it's important to, to note that while a guest on this panel, I'm certainly speaking my own truth, my own opinions, and am not representative of all First Nations across Canada. So I just wanted to kind of say that. But in terms of lived experience, Manjula, I grew up in the North for most of my life, and am a proud graduate of Sir Sanford Fleming, or Fleming College as it's known now. And that was my first time coming to Southern Ontario, or coming out of the North to the South. And that was a big, big change for me. Coming from a small town, Peterborough was a huge place compared to what I was used to. So, and a huge cultural difference in terms of what I had experienced to date. So it was a large learning curve for me. And since then, moving to a larger urban center of Ottawa, it was very difficult to see Aboriginal people around me, which I was really used to in a lot of cases. Even throughout my institution, I was really happy to know that the college was making every effort to create a Aboriginal student center at the time, and making space for Aboriginal or Indigenous students to gather, whether they were First Nations, Métis, or Inuit. So that to me was a huge step. And dare I say, it was well over 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that has happened. And I've seen more progression, but a lot of my experience has come through visiting communities right across Canada, through my work, meeting with chief and counselors and the leaders in the community, but also stepping back and spending time with youth, spending time with elders to learn different things, because I don't profess to know everything, but I certainly know a lot, or have learned a lot through listening to many people's stories in terms of what their experience is. So I like to bring that to the work that I do on a regular basis through the First Nations Finance Authority. And I mentioned earlier that, I was fortunate enough to live in a foot in both worlds. So I've been described as a bridge builder or connector, of connecting the Indigenous community to the non-Indigenous community, which I value greatly.
Mm. There's so much in there. The idea, because what you've spoken about in a way is the experience of someone who goes through that change into the post-secondary sector, and I think also the importance of having people that are aware of what the lived experience can bring to restructuring their organizations, or realigning their organizations to what has to get done by this country in the next while. Ashley, I'd love for you to talk about what informs your work.
Absolutely. Punusakut at ako mangapik paniltum yutay nga kisyaniman na White Horse meet po nga. Good afternoon. My name is Ashley Cummings. My traditional name is Kumangapik, and I'm from Paniltu, Nunavut, but I'm currently living in Whitehorse, Yukon. I like to call myself as an Inuit advocate, because that has been probably the biggest part of my life for the better part of it. I was fortunate enough to be raised a lot with my grandparents, and also spent a lot of time with a lot of family when I was really little. And so I felt very deeply into my culture. And growing up, I definitely noticed I would get treated differently from other people because of how I looked, or because of how I was raised. And so that really lit a fire in me, alongside being involved with great organizations like Students on Ice, where it really rocketed me into being an advocate. And so fortunately through my work, I've been able to sit as the co-chair of the Indigenous Advisory Council for Kids Help Phone. I've also served on the Prime Minister's Youth Council, and I'm currently on the board of directors for UConstruct, a local makerspace and co-working space here in Whitehorse. And so a lot of my work has always surrounded mental health and also supporting Indigenous youth. I'm a firm believer in nothing about us without us, and I really try and represent my communities as well as I can.
And we're going to get into that what you just said, the nothing about us without us, and or nothing for us without us, and we'll get into that because I think that's a theme that's going to emerge again and again in this conversation, I'm certain. Bob, I'd love to hear your story as well, and I should say I believe you've just joined the board of trustees at Queen's University, so congratulations.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Really happy to be with you. Yeah, I just joined the board just about a month ago. I was an adjunct prof and fellow at Queen's for the last 11 years and developed what I think was maybe one of the really early, maybe the first graduate level course in reconciliation at the School of Policy Studies at Queen's. So I should start, like everyone else, Bonjour, Sego, Kanoshamwaki Magazine, Indigenous Makwadodam. So my name is Talpine, and I'm from the Bear Clan. Really happy to be with you. I'm from 6 nations of the Grand River and have close family at Tyndonega, Curve Lake, and Hiawatha First Nations also, all in southern Ontario. In terms of some of the things that have informed my work and my life, I think it was a lot of women. It was like my grandmothers, my aunties, my mom, and nowadays even my younger sister, who's kind of taken over the role of my mom since she's passed on. So women are really important in our society. The encouragement that I was given to stretch out, to explore, to try new things, knowing that I had their support, offered me a chance to do things that I probably otherwise wouldn't. I'm really fortunate. I went to Harvard University, got my master's degree at Harvard, and had worked with National Chief Fontaine on negotiating the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. And later I was the executive director that set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So one of the things that I've learned through many different things that I've worked on is this idea of manifest the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. And I think that's true for the work that I'm doing in reconciliation, for the work I'm doing with Corporate Canada, is really to try to manifest all those principles and values that are consistent with reconciliation. That you can't get to where you want to get to unless you're doing all that work as part of the journey and manifesting that all the way along. There's no sort of jumping over all those things and you arrive magically at some place called reconciliation. It's work. And so I'm grateful for those important women in my life, including my wife and my daughters. I have one daughter who has a PhD and another one who's working on her PhD right now. So that intergenerational legacy, I guess, I'm seeing, and nothing makes me prouder than to see what my daughters and my grandkids are doing in terms of trying to advance their education, but ensuring that there's a cultural and a ceremonial component to everything that they're doing. So happy to be part of this panel.
Well, we're delighted to have you here. And I love that idea that you've already sort of put on the table here, which is that even though this is a tremendous amount of work, the seeds have to be placed so that they grow over time, and the hard work has to be done. As you mentioned in your family, you now have this legacy in academia, right? But that has to start with something. So let's talk about the TRC's 94 calls to action. Denise Amio and I were just talking about it, 6 years ago today. And, there's been criticism of the kind of action that's come out of that report as well. From your perspective, how would you describe our collective response to these calls? Have there been, bright spots, any achievements that we could learn from? And what would you say are the most notable failures that you've seen? Ashley, I'll start with you.
Thank you. Well, of course, I think the greatest achievement is that they exist. We have these amazing resources that we can look to directly if there's something we want to do towards reconciliation in Canada. It places a lot of really a powerful onus on citizens of Canada to participate in reconciliation, making it reconciliation. And that's a really beautiful thing. But I think the failures come in where the government of Canada has not fully implemented to the extent that we should be. Because yes, it's amazing we have this resource, but what are we going to do if we're not actively implementing the entire resource? I'm so thankful and glad that the TRC has been funded and we have this resource. Once again, my mom went to residential school, and of course, it's a close thing to my heart. But what are we going to do if we don't use this resource that we spent a lot of emotional labor as Indigenous peoples creating, and now what's next?
Jody, I know that one of the things that matters to you is economic reconciliation as well. How would you say we've done so far responding to those calls, and also more specifically on the economic front?
I would tend to agree with Ashley in terms of the biggest accomplishment is that we're having this discussion, and these discussions continue to happen. And I say that because I have the utmost respect why we're having these discussions, and those survivors who had to share their stories in order to get to where we are today. So I do take it very personally that it is our responsibility to continue to have those discussions and not let their stories be lost in history ever again. I'm a true believer that the discovery of the graves, there's voices that still need to be heard. And this is not a fad. This is not a phase in our history. These are real stories and a really dark part of our history, but there's no shortcut to the other side in helping everyone heal. We have to go through the uncomfortable discussions that are the stark reality of what has happened. And I know that, there's a lot of people in our country who just were not aware of what had happened. And so it's only now that we're really beginning to shed light to some of these horrific stories in place. And so that, Ashley, I thought that was a fantastic point. In terms of, what are we doing really well? Kudos to the educational institutes who have moved that needle. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect, but have certainly said we need to be leaders and, start doing things differently. And what does that mean? And again, it's very difficult to teach about us without us, and ensuring that the facts now are being relayed appropriately. In terms of economic reconciliation, I believe that we have definitely started taking steps, but we are still limited, and we are still under a whole lot of barriers under the Indian Act itself. In terms of how communities can build businesses. And the reality is that no level of government has ever prospered from being dependent from other levels of government. So one of the, this is something that UNDRIP is really recognizing in terms of our right to self-determination and what that means. Having the true authority to make decisions about our lands by our own people. So while I have seen a lot of progression, there's still a lot of work that has still yet to be done, Manjula.
So there's that core problem of authority that gets in the way of substantial action. Bob?
Yeah, I'm kind of disappointed in some ways the progress that's been made over the last 6 years. It seemed like the stars were aligned to do a lot of amazing things, and that hasn't happened. It doesn't mean that there hasn't been some good things, but there should have been a whole lot more. And I think some of the things that we see out there, some are purely symbolic, which in itself may not be a horrible thing. Like sometimes symbolism is really important to bring people's attention to something that they may not have been part of their experience, or they may not understand. But translating that into substantive progress is really important. And that the UNDRIP, what it says in UNDRIP is it says that it constitutes the minimum standards for the survival, dignity, and well-being of Indigenous peoples in the world. That's huge. That's huge. So that's part of our job. And the TRC said UNDRIP was the pathway to reconciliation. So we have a lot of work that we have to do. There's some great examples, I think, out there. I know sitting on the Downey Winjack board, we've seen the number of legacy schools almost double in the last year, which is incredible. So many educators talking to kids and kids talking to their families. Orange Shirt Day, Day to Listen, Canada Day, all of them were just seas of orange, which means, ordinary, everyday Canadians like us and Indigenous people were out standing shoulder to shoulder, saying we want something different. We don't want a kinder, gentler form of colonization. We want something dramatically different in terms of access to power, access to resources, and recognition of our own lawmaking authority. That's what we need to be working on, and that's what's kind of deficient in terms of where we are.
Now we're also, at a point of the intersection of a series of really sad events that have taken place this year, and I'm talking about the discovery of graves. I wonder, if you think that in some way we are going to get beyond the theater and the lip service that has been happening for a while. If coming to face with such a sad with such sad details about our history will make Canadians act or will make authorities act. Do you think that we're at a time of change? Jody, I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Manjula. I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful. Bob alluded to the numbers that came out and participated and stood in solidarity this entire year. I've never seen that type of solidarity from both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in this country. I felt extremely supported. I know personally I had many friends and colleagues reaching out to me to say, what can I do? How can I help? What do I need to do with my kids to have this discussion? And those are the types of things that are meaningful because, again, it starts the discussion. So I am hopeful, Manjula, in terms of where things are going. I hope that it's not lip service because as I alluded to earlier, when the stories from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission were sought after and shared, I pray that was not all for naught. And those survivors had to go through a lot to recant their own stories and relive a lot of the devastation. And I think it's our responsibility to ensure that change happens. And I know I will never let go of that in my career as long as I live.
So, one of the things that we certainly want to get to in the conversation today, really the question of the hour, is how can Canada's post-secondary sector do a better job at closing the educational gaps and the employment gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. So let's talk about you're talking to the people listening here, you have ears that are open that want to hear about what they can do in terms of change. So Ashley, let me start off with you because you're a student as well. What would you like to see post-secondary institutions do to bridge that gap?
Well, in my post-secondary experience, I've been fortunate to have university presidents that were really open and honest about wanting to meaningfully engage in reconciliation, whether that was at Mount Allison University previously or now at Yukon University. Dr. Leslie Brown is an excellent university president, and she's talked to me about how she's willing to help bridge these gaps, kind of things, just in casual conversations. And so it's a really important thing that the administration is on board with this. And of course, the classes, and at Yukon U, there's a number of courses that are required for all students where you get educated on Indigenous issues. So I think that's a really important first step across the board, because unfortunately for my generation and generations before me, we didn't have a whole lot of Indigenous related education in our, high school, middle school, all of that stuff. I got essentially none when I was living down south. I got some when I was living in the north, but not enough. And so we need to fill those gaps in university, whether that's in in the trades educations, just to have that information available, and also in our institutions where academics and researchers are being made.
Now, the other thing that I think about when we think about access to post-secondary education is post-secondary education to many people in Canada can feel like a little bit of a luxury. Do you think that it needs a rethink? I mean, should we be looking at it and treating it like a necessity, the way we treat elementary school, as an example? Bob?
What an interesting question. Like I don't know. I think it should be a human right, but I don't know whether we'll get there. But clearly, it's required some form of post-secondary, whether it's in the trades, whether it's in other branches of the academy. Absolute requirement for being able to walk with your head held high, have a well-paying job that you can take care of your family and contribute to your community. No question about that. One of the things that I'm really hopeful about is one of the initiatives going on in Ontario right now, where we have the Indigenous Advanced Education and Skills Council, which has the authority to recognize Indigenous institutions as degree and diploma granting institutions. So it really is an ability for Indigenous communities through their institutions to exercise sovereignty with respect to post-secondary education and have courses that are developed in and with community. I think that's really powerful.
And is that a new initiative?
It's about 3 years old, and we've just been getting into the part about now about working with institutes in terms of the requirements for being able to have their programs recognized for diploma and degree. And there's been a couple examples where that's been recognized in the last few months, actually.
Jody, perhaps I'll get you to answer this as well. How we can ensure that there's more equitable access to post-secondary education for Indigenous people and communities. What would you like to see?
Yeah. Thanks, Manjula. I feel like I have so many things in my brain that I would like to share about this topic, and certainly, and I'm just going to say what comes to mind, but certainly, funding disparities between on-reserve schools and off-reserve schools is a big one. And what that means in terms of quality of education, not just, I know we're talking about post-secondary, but it starts really at the K to 8 level, and that just follows along. That's important. Second, having schools in some of the communities where students don't have to leave their communities is a big one, because a lot of students are afraid to leave their communities. Some parallels to residential schools, but they're simply afraid for this massive change that's about to happen, or they don't see themselves reflected in some of the post-secondary institutions that they're attending. So, these are things that we need to work on. Certainly, working on financial literacy at all levels, I think, is important. I remember I took a financial literacy course as an elective when I was going to school, but I wish that it was mandatory all the way through, because I think that will help in terms of future skill sets and understanding. And certainly in our communities, there's a massive need for capacity in these areas. We see shortages. And if you look at what the gap is between Indigenous students who are achieving post-secondary degrees, I think it's something like 29% of non-Indigenous people aged 25 to 64 are receiving degrees, yet the Indigenous population is still sitting under 11%. So we need to really increase that. And the students that are going to school and achieving degrees or obtaining their degrees in education tend to be related to career paths that they see or we see in our communities. So they're lawyers, because we're always dealing with lawyers, or social workers, they're teachers. We are seeing policy workers and public administration now, but I'd love to see more, like I said, more uptake in finance and accounting. I would love to see more engineers, and in the STEM area. These things kind of don't exist because they're not visible in our communities. So we need to increase the visibility of these types of careers. Journalism, as another example. So, oftentimes in smaller communities, the bands, or the jobs exist at the band office or the schools or the nursing stations. So we need to work on that. We need to increase visibility. But further to that, we need to go back a step and look at kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you will, because there's a lot of pockets of poverty that still exist in a lot of our communities, particularly in the North. And, some of these students, they're not worried about post-secondary education. They're worried about getting food on their table or trying to find adequate housing for their family that just doesn't exist. And it's very, very difficult to obtain. So we need to actually look at basic infrastructure first, and safety as a whole for a lot of our communities.
Well said. I think that's such a powerful point. And the idea that if you're worried about food on your table, the safety of your housing, you really can't start thinking about whether you want to sign up to take engineering courses or whatever, or become, the plumber for your community. Absolutely. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'd like to continue this conversation with a few more people, and welcome back to our virtual table, Denise Amiot, the president and CEO of CICAN. Welcome Larry Rosia to the table. He's the president and CEO of Saskatchewan Polytechnic. Good afternoon, Larry, Denise.
Good afternoon.
So let me start you off here. First of all, Larry, do you have any comments or questions for our guests on anything and everything that you've heard?
I've got maybe just a couple comments, and great conversation. Thank you to all of our guests for raising the important points that they did raise. But good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, wherever you're at. Tawau, Hawanin, Kanchi, Atlantate. And I would like to acknowledge that Saskatchewan Polytechnic campuses are located on Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territories, which are the ancestral lands of the Cree, the Saulteaux, B'nai Dakota, Lakota, Nakota peoples, and the traditional homeland of the Métis. One of the things that stood out for me, and I think it was Bob and Jody that spoke about Jody at Fleming College and the importance of support systems that were put in place for Indigenous students coming from probably pretty small communities into larger centers, and really how important that was. And Bob talked about the intergenerational effects that education has. we had an elder that works with us. Her name is Myrna Uzichipi, and Myrna refers to education as the new buffalo, something that we really believe in at Saskatchewan Polytechnic. But for me, and I know there's a lot of college and polytechnic leaders on the line. Just a story about the importance of those support systems and kind of that intergenerational legacy. There was a young Métis woman. Her name was Desiree Martin, and I'm going to quote her. When I spoke with her, she struggled about personal issues, but the impetus for her to overcome them was that she could be well and do well in her program. Um, and she said, in order to do that, she used all of the services that she needed at Saskatchewan Polytechnic in order to succeed. Services like our elders, our Indigenous student support centers, counselors are critical to Indigenous student success. And then again, the leaders in the colleges and polytechnics on this call have these types of centers and these types of support systems in place. But I just wanted to underscore how important those are. Last year, our Indigenous coordinators had over 4,000, close to 5,000 appointments. Our Indigenous advisors, 9,600 interactions with students. So those support systems are critical to helping our Indigenous students succeed. And why is it important for them to succeed? Well, another little story I can share with you about a student named Harley. In Saskatoon, my head office is in an office downtown. I'm not on campus, and I'm always looking to go to see a student when I'm on campus. And so I entered our campus, and I'm walking down the hallway, and I see an Indigenous male, probably in his 30s, 30, 32, 33. So I walk over and I sit down on the bench beside him, and I say, "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" Probably worded it wrong because he looked at me kind of, "Who are you, and why are you asking me?" But then I introduced myself and I said, "What are you doing at Saskatchewan Polytechnic?" And he said, "Well, I'm not really at Saskatchewan Polytechnic. I'm in the adult upgrading program." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, the adult upgrading is part of Saskatchewan Polytechnic and what we deliver. So welcome to Saskatchewan Polytechnic. I'm glad you've chosen to do your upgrading here." And I said, "So what are you going to do when you upgrade, and what are you upgrading?" He said, "Well, I'm upgrading my math." And I said, so right away I always ask, "Is it hard? And how are you doing?" And he said, "Yes, I've been out of school a long time, but really the instructors are great. They're spending extra time with me. I'm passing and I'm doing well." And I said, "Well, good for you, Harley. I'm glad you've taken that step. What do you want to do when you finish your adult upgrading?" And he said, "Well, I want to be a welder." So now I'm thinking, how can I help find employment and a job for Harley? So I said, "Well, you want to work for a big company, a small company, a fab shop? What are you going to do with your welding?" He looked at me and he paused for a while and didn't know whether to say it or not. But then he said, "I want to own my own truck someday." And I said, "Harley, that's terrific." I said, "You're taking all the proper steps here, and you're doing what's right. You're talking about it. You've got a plan. Congratulations. I'm really proud of you." I said, "So what did you do before you came to school? Did you school long? Where'd you work?" He said, "Well, a lot of small jobs, on and off. Never really had a steady job." He said, the steadiest job I had was the job I quit to come here and go to school." And so I said,
I mean, that
"Well,
speaks,
again,
yeah.
I'm really proud of you." But again, the importance of support systems in place and our institutions doing everything we can to help that individual be successful as they take that first step to enter the education system and start their careers.
That's a great story, Larry. And I think it speaks to a bit of what Ashley was also talking about, how you need to have the support systems all the way through. And even when you at the tail end, when you're thinking about, well, where can I see a fit for employment? I think it's not just the idea of, okay, here's your education and abandoning people, but actually showing them a path for moving forward. Denise, I'm sure that you have conversations like this with so many of the other leaders as well in the sector.
Yes, Manjula. And what's happening is that the stories that Larry has shared with us, I'm hearing those stories all the time, and the reason it's because for the entire college and institute systems, we have over 300 programs specifically tailored for the needs of Indigenous communities. And, Jody talked about some of the jobs that are on the reserve, and she would like to see some of the people graduated. And in fact, there are quite a few. That's why the students take those. And maybe I'll share some statistics with you. Jody talked about the 11% that have degree versus the 29 in the non-Indigenous. And at the diploma level, I'm pleased to report that it is the same percentage. And at the trade level, in fact, it's 1% more for Indigenous people. And we know that apprenticeship often lead to ownership also of your own enterprise, your own company. And with the advent of the degrees at the college level, I believe that also the number of students that will have a degree will increase tremendously. Unfortunately, right now, Stats Canada does not distinguish if the degree has been obtained from a college or from a, because I believe that those numbers would also be telling.
Thank you, Denise. I think we might have lost just one last word from you, but we did get your point. So let me ask you this, and for anyone who wants to weigh in, one of the points that critics may say is that governments, organizations can be really slow movers, and post-secondary institutions are also really big. Can they rise to the challenge that we're hearing here? Denise, I'll have you take a stab at that. How will they
As
rise to this really large challenge?
I would say they are rising to the challenge. The numbers speak for themselves. And if I looked at all the practices that have been put in place, it's very good. I don't. They also talked to me about other aspects that were did. They talked about language, for example, that is still an issue, not being taught enough. They also talked about the representation of faculty because it's still not easy to find professors or faculty that are Indigenous. And I think more people will be in those. It will also act as a role model.
Now, I don't know, Larry. Larry, do you want to talk about that criticism that post-secondary institutions may be seen as slow movers?
Yeah, I'd love to. That is a criticism, and it's a criticism for the most part because it has been true. But one of the things about colleges and polytechnics, I think, over the last 10 years is they've become much more nimble and agile. And the reason they've done that is because of the close connection and partnerships they have with industry. That's a key differentiator for us. All of our programs have industry councils and advisors, specialists, experts that advise us on what needs to be in the curriculum. So we have the connections to industry. We understand the skills that employers need, and we have programs that are short. They're not 4 or 6 year programs. They're sometimes 12 weeks, 16 weeks, 1 year, 2 year, and they have the mechanisms to help individuals get into a program, the support systems, and through the program, and connect them to a job. I think we have a tremendous opportunity in front of us. Across Canada, worldwide, we're hearing about skill shortage, labor shortage, talent shortage. Royal Bank just put out a study in their thought leadership series, and they talked about 7,500 Indigenous youth are leaving the education system into the workforce. We have an opportunity to upskill and reskill all of those individuals to become part of Canada's economy. And in order to do that, we need to be agile, we need to be responsive. And one of the recent initiatives out of the colleges and institutions is micro-credentials, where we are offering short courses that are used to upskill and give people skills to get into gainful employment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Larry. Bob, I'm curious about this also because you have this life in academia, and now you have a leadership position within a post-secondary institution as well. When I look at Indigenous communities, Indigenous knowledge holders, elders, artists, entrepreneurs, they make all these contributions to their communities and society in general. What more do you think post-secondary institutions can be doing to ensure the preservation of Indigenous knowledge and culture?
Yeah, that's a great question, and to me, it really speaks about the need for things like equity and strong collaboration. To me, it would be a bit of a shame in some ways to have done all the work in terms of recognizing Indigenous knowledge as being equal to Western knowledge or Western science within the academy, and then thinking about those institutions as being kind of the repository of our knowledge and our language. So that's going to require some real innovation in terms of thinking about what does partnership mean, and what does ownership mean, what does collaboration mean, what does intellectual property mean, all these things from an Indigenous perspective. Um, and I think that there is a nimbleness that's been mentioned in terms of the college system and the polytechnic system to be able to move quickly. Not seeing quite as much from university, but really hopeful that that's going to happen. At the same time, I mean, I'm such a strong believer in terms of Indigenous institutions being able to have their own sovereignty and having relationships with non-Indigenous institutions um, according to their own expectations and their own sovereignty and their own abilities. Sometimes we see, some of these partnerships where non-Indigenous institutions who form a relationship with an Indigenous institute, applying things like eligibility standards on Indigenous institutions that aren't the same as Indigenous institutions would look at Indigenous people. So folks are still being left out with the application of standards that are not helpful for a lot of Indigenous people.
Well, I know that one of the things that I've noticed more recently than I would say perhaps a decade ago is courses now on Indigenous history and Indigenous culture that people in non-Indigenous communities can take. And I think it's interesting. I know a couple of people around me that in unrelated roles that are taking these, which I find actually fascinating. I'm actually really impressed that they are. I just wonder, Ashley, if you want to talk about, we've talked about helping Indigenous communities advance within the educational sector and use education to advance themselves. What do educational institutions have to do for non-Indigenous communities to help them, allow this all to happen? You know what I mean? Because I think that it's going to take some education on that front too. I wonder if you've had your front.
I'm sorry, a little bit there.
I think we may be losing.
Lula, maybe I can give you a polytechnic while we wait to connection. Yeah, so Saskatchewan Polytechnic tried to in the very cultural rate Codoin and
I think Larry, you're breaking
up as well.
Too, Larry. See, one of those moments, everyone be on the internet. So I'm going to come back to you. I do have a question for you because micro credentials made me think of the labor market. Are expected to widen over the years. All and immigrant help in doing from all of these job opportunities.
To answer, I got everything because what I can say is for shortage now to have everybody that want to work at work. And this means that we need to support people with upskilling and reskilling, and also those that maybe didn't have a chance before or did not complete their high school to have the possibility of completing the basics so that they can have access to higher education. That's certainly something that I believe is very important. And for the non-Indigenous, I think it's essential to improve their knowledge and their connections also with Indigenous people. Like one of my friends said the other day, can you name, if you just ask a group, can you name 3 First Nations communities or 3 Indigenous leaders, or have you read a book written by an Indigenous person this year? So those are things that I think are important. And when we begin to be able to answer those are the things that will make a difference.
Thank you, Denise. I don't know. I see a lot of people nodding. Ashley, hopefully we can get. I'm sorry, my apologies again because our connections seem here and there. But Ashley, you seem to be nodding. Would you like to weigh in? And one thing I'll say is because we're in the last few minutes of our conversation too. If while you're doing that, if you have a big ask of people like Larry, Denise, and all of the leaders, this is the time to do it. So go ahead.
Thank you. I think that institutions being inevitably colonial, especially any university, any trades college, anything like that. But that being said, because there's always this influx of students and this rotation of people getting educated, I think it really shows how important these kind of brave spaces are in universities and colleges, because it's just so essential to challenge your own views and other people's views when you're in these spaces. And so I think it's really impressive how, despite being a colonial institution, many universities and colleges are furthering more and more and challenging their views and encouraging Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples to connect in a really powerful way. And so I think that does show that, the power of the collective, all Canadian citizens connecting in this way is it will further how we move as a country towards reconciliation, because government does move slowly. It's a lot of work to get different legislature changed, and I think colleges are really the space where it's being furthered.
Thank you. And a big ask for is there a big ask that you'd like to put out to them?
Just challenge your views, engage with Indigenous folks, and once again, nothing about us without us. There's an important lesson in challenging the way you give and receive information, both from Indigenous peoples and to Indigenous peoples, and meeting us where we're at, whether it's encouraging for example, here in Whitehorse, we're working on a First Nations school board. And so we're trying to further ways in our secondary schools and stuff like that. But we need to remove as many institutional barriers that we can't, that keeps Indigenous folks from being in post-secondary educations, like making it more accessible and making it more, in our
Thank
communities.
you, Ashley.
I'd love to see more trades programs being offered in northern and rural settings.
Thank you, Ashley. And I think we have about a minute left, so I'll break it up between Bob and Jody. Bob, very quickly, a giant ask that you'd like to put out to the leaders that are listening. I think Bob may be frozen.
I think that,
so Jody, I'll go to you.
Leaving Indigenous communities, going whether it's secondary school or post-secondary, it's a big leap for some people. So to the extent that a safe place and a safe space can be created for Indigenous people, the likelihood of dramatic change for both individuals and families can be manifest. So I really would encourage people to think about, like, what does a safe place, what does safe space look like in your institutions to ensure Indigenous people feel at home? Thank you.
All right. Jody, you have the last word.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you, Manjula, and thank you to the others. I echo what my colleagues have said, but I also challenge the institution. Surely you have a strategic plan. Do all institutions have a reconciliation strategy in place? And do you have Indigenous people on your boards and your committees and at the highest level to ensure this message is brought from the senior leadership?
Thank you, Jody. Thank you to all of you. That was fantastic conversation. There's so many ideas here. I think I'll have to rewatch this to kind of learn again. But thank you so much for such a frank conversation. And I really hope that we can have this conversation again soon, because I think there's a commitment here and energy here to make change. And I will just say that, starting long before the pandemic, many of CICAN's members were creating innovative ways to make their programs more accessible to more students, including Indigenous learners. A new website has just gone live that showcases many of these initiatives. You can check it out at reducingbarrierstoeducation.ca. And if you have an initiative at your college or institute and you'd like it added to the website, please do submit it. And of course, there's so much always going on in the post-secondary sector. To stay informed about key developments led by CICAN, the government, and other national and international partners, remember to subscribe to CICAN's free bi-monthly newsletter, Perspectives. And of course, we would love to hear your perspectives and questions on today's discussion. Maybe there's something you've seen, there's something you wish to do, initiative you've been a part of, a positive change, a negative comment, whatever it is, we'd love to hear it. You can do so by emailing us at this address that's appearing on the screen, live@collegesinstitutes.ca. And thank you to everyone that was on this panel: Jody Anderson, Ashley Cummings, Bob Watts, Larry Rosia, and Denise Amio, for your insights. And really, you've just energized me to read and to think about this more in what I do every day as well. And to everyone listening, we'll be back in the new year. Circle off Wednesday, January the 19th for the next episode of Perspectives Live. Our topic will be Inside the Mental Health Shadow Pandemic. Thank you for joining us today. I'm crossing my fingers that we all have a great 2022. Stay safe and happy holidays.